I have a lot of people that talk about wanting to lease out their home or evaluating whether or not it makes sense to sell their home versus leasing their home, especially in the Austin, Texas area. There were a lot of people over the last couple of years that relocated here or have moved here and decided that they like the place. I like to say that people moved because of love or money, but because of life circumstances, something's changed and now they have this home, and this becomes the question. Do I lease it or do I sell it? I'm Ian of Austin. If you've ever been to my channel or never been to my channel, hopefully there's a lot of information on here that's very advantageous for you. I love working with first-time home buyers, investors, new construction buyers, relocation people, multifamily. I do a lot of stuff and I love it. And I've been doing this for a while now in the Austin, Texas area. So anyway, most of my clients, when they ask whether or not it makes sense to sell versus lease their home, 95% of the time, I'm going to say you should probably lease it. And the reason why is because this is such an incredible time to have an investment in the Austin, Texas area. We know Elon Musk has called Austin a boomtown. We know that there are a lot of other companies that are moving here or building something here. Samsung has been here for years, but they also just announced like this mega plant in Taylor, which is only 30 minutes from Austin, Texas. We know that Dell Computers has built a life here. VMware, so many tech companies, Oracle, Meta. I would imagine that now that Elon Musk bought Twitter, X.com will probably end up with some stuff here. SpaceX, Boring Company. I know I'm just listing off a lot of Elon Musk companies, but that's because he has the Tesla Gigafactory here. There are just so many reasons why it makes sense to really pay attention to the growth that Austin's experiencing and will continue to experience over the next 10, 20, and 30 years. And if we look at LA and New York and Chicago and these mega cities, Dallas even, these mega cities, they're just growing out. Like the city itself has always stayed in demand, and the suburbs, as you're moving out, continue to grow with it. And I feel like that same thing's happening with Austin. And so anybody who has a home, they don't need the capital from the sale of their home, then I highly recommend that they keep it. Now, where does that come into play? If you're going to keep the home, you have to understand the process. And so the part of the process that I wanted to share is this. I love to help people find the tenant for their home. I'm not a property manager. They are different roles, okay? So my job would be to help my clients find a tenant. I market the home. I make sure to do whatever I can to get it out to other realtors, to other prospective tenants. I hit all of the other websites, just like I would be selling a home. Even though this is a lease and it operates a little bit differently, I still do the same amount of work. Where that comes into play is I have clients that want to manage the property on their own. And then I have other clients that are like, I don't want to deal with it and I want to hire a property management company. If that becomes the case, while I'm not a property manager, I have relationships with a lot of property management companies. And so if you don't want to have to manage the property on your own, and usually it's people that have either, 1 to 5 or 6 or 7 properties. Once you get above 5 properties, most people don't want to deal with it. They don't want to deal with the headache of calls late at night, which I'll address here in a little bit. They don't want to deal with tenant not paying their rent, which I'll address here in a little bit. They don't want to deal with it. The other thing is, it also depends where you are. If you're in close proximity, you might be more adept to be able to handle a situation for a tenant calling you at 1 a.m. But if you're, across a couple states or a few borders, then it's less comfortable for you to have to manage that, especially when you're talking different time zones. What I recommend for most people is if you do want to have a property management company, what I would do is get us situated with the lease, introduce us to the property management company, and while we're working on getting a tenant, you're working on building that relationship with one of the property management companies that I connect you with, and you decide who has the best rate, qualifications, and experience for you. And where that comes in is property management companies tend to charge approximately 8 to 12%. It's all negotiable, but tend to charge about that much in the Austin area. And where you get lower rates is generally if you have more properties or they're doing less work, right? So maybe they don't have a payment portal for you. Well, that's okay because I can connect you with a payment portal. That's something that I already have to do when I'm screening tenants that are looking to lease this place out. So that's definitely part of the conversation. And if you're going to talk short-term versus long-term, that's a whole separate conversation. We'll have to get into that independent. So one way that I help my landlords handle their tenants if they choose not to use a property management company is I like to focus on having a home warranty and a handyman in place, because that way if the tenant needs somebody to call, they can call them and not the landlord. right? Because the landlord generally doesn't want to deal with it. And so this kind of creates that separation. You can be as friendly as you want with your tenants, as kind, and build whatever relationship. That's wonderful. But it's also really nice when they don't have to call you when they need something. They have a contingency plan, or you have a contingency plan. You might be on vacation or having dinner with your partner or something like that and not want to deal with a tenant complaint or situation. So that's one thing. I think the second thing that's really important is to understand that property insurance is absolutely vital. The type of insurance that you have and what the insurance provider covers is incredibly important for you to review. So when you own a property, let's say you're going through an insurance broker or a private type of insurance company that just focuses on one type of plan, having the insurance for your home when you live in it is very different when you are an investor of a property. Here's why. Let's say you have a tenant and something happens and they didn't have any rental insurance, which is something that I try to make sure that every tenant has before they move into the property. If they didn't have rental insurance and there's a fire, who's responsible? Now, let's make that even more difficult and say that they actually had a roommate that they never put on the lease, and that person is the one that started the fire. Now, whose responsibility? Now, let's make it one more layer of complexity and say that in the backyard, there was a trampoline, okay? The insurance company didn't ask you the question about trampolines, but most insurance companies have a rider that says trampolines are unsafe. If there's anything that happens to the property and there's a trampoline, you will void all insurance claims. So now you have some person that is staying with your tenant and their kid or their friend's kid gets hurt on a trampoline, or the house burns down, or there's, a hailstorm or any of that, and it affects your property. But because of their trampoline, now the insurance company won't cover the claim. Then what? This is the conversation that I like to make sure to protect my clients with, and why we get all of these things in place up front, and why I ask all these questions up front, and why I make sure that the insurance is done up front. So that's another really vital point to make sure that this happens. Another thing that's really, really vital is when we are deciding to market the property, whether or not it's going to be vacant is relevant, how easy it is for people to see the property, whether or not you are allowing pets, and then allowing me as the lease listing agent to get good pictures. Now, I may not hire a professional photographer like I do when I'm selling homes, but even for leases, you still want the photos to be nice because it's going out on hundreds of websites and hitting thousands of people. We want the photos to hit in a different light. And sometimes I have relationships with a professional photographer that might do that. But I've also taken enough photography classes on my own to where I understand composure, framing, and a lot of things that make a good real estate photo. That doesn't make me a professional. It just means I'm trying to educate myself so I can work in the realm or live in the same space as a lot of professionals. Because at the end of the day, that comes out of my pocket. And so now that brings me to the last point that I feel is really important. Typical compensation. So I'm going to start off by saying everything is negotiable. However, what I prefer to charge is my fee. I have to be careful with how I say things. Gosh, which is also really important. What I prefer to charge is my fee, and what I see a lot of other agents charging as their fee for leasing out a property is approximately 1 month's rent. And so here's how this works. If you say,
yes, Ian, I want you to list this property for me for lease,
I say, great, my fee is X, and let's say your lease is $2,500 a month. Great. I go through the background checks. I make sure that you get to review the tenants and the applications. I manage all of that. I run my team, my admin, and all of us handle that for you to keep you in the loop, but also stress-free. Like, hey, we've had 5 applications. This is what they look like. Do you want to move forward with any of them, or do you want to wait? And what's your choice? After all of that, we accept. I send lease paperwork, make sure everybody is happy and everything makes sense and everything gets signed. And then I end up sending an invoice after the clients move in, or at the time that the clients move in. I handle working with the keys and lock boxes and getting all of that stuff situated and set up for my clients. And then even if other agents are bringing the tenant, then in that case, I actually have to pay that other agent. My client does not have to pay the other agent. It comes out of my fee. We get everything set up, and then I send an invoice from my brokerage to my client, which allows us to invoice them for the fee that we had originally discussed, which is generally 1 month's rent. As part of that, there's also a security deposit. And so I will make sure that before anybody moves in, you have your security deposit and your first month's rent before they receive any keys to the property. So I'm managing a lot of things on behalf of my landlord or my client. And so it ends up being a really good relationship for all of us, because at the end of the day, I want you to be happy. I also want, at some point, these tenants are going to want to move out and buy another house, or you as an owner are going to want to get another tenant, or you as an owner might eventually want to sell your house. So at that point, it's just a relationship. And I want to make sure that I treat this relationship with respect and do the things that make sure that all of us win along the way. And I do my best to protect my clients. And that's the very last thing I'm going to mention for this particular video is the Texas property code. So if you are a property manager, there is a whole guideline, which I will make sure to put in the description of this video, for how you're supposed to operate as a landlord, right? Property management companies operate based on this. Newer investors or people that are managing their own properties should know this, but many don't. And so this is where I say, please do your due diligence. I don't care if you use ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, it doesn't matter. Read through it, understand this document and where you can and can't do things, and then you will be in a really good spot once you have a tenant in your property. Things like, do you change the keys? What is a key box authorization? What if the tenant doesn't allow another future prospective tenant to look at the property so that they know if they want to lease it when it's coming toward the end of their lease term? Like, these are all things that I discuss with my clients as part of setting up the lease listing. But at the end of the day, it is incumbent upon you as owner of the property to really understand these laws. So hopefully this all makes a lot of sense. Hopefully it was extremely helpful. I appreciate you taking the time with me. Once again, I am Ian of Austin, and I think we've covered a lot when it comes to whether or not you want to lease your property or list it for sale. Let me know if you have any other questions. I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Thanks for watching.